Recently, I did a video talking about Tulsa, Oklahoma, and how it's about to be 100 years in 2021. And one of my subscribers had left a comment on that video asking me to do a video about something called the Devil's Punch Bowl. Now, this is something that I have heard before in passing, maybe not as much as Black Wall Street, because that one was really put out there more so, not as much to be honest, but more than the Devil's Punch Bowl. And this one right here, depending on where you research, you'll rarely find anything on it. Now, this is one thing I can honestly say was not taught to us in school. And I'm not surprised, because if they're not going to teach about Black Wall Street, I know they weren't going to touch on this. And this one right here was horrific in and of itself, because basically, like, when I was doing my research, it's almost like the free emancipated slaves got tricked into being funneled back into slavery after slavery was abolished, only to be killed, like, and not really experience true freedom. I have the article right in front of me, and it was actually posted back in 2016 in June. So it's like I had to go back 3 years just to find an article to read from to talk about this, because it's not a lot of information out there other than what has been put out there. And I'm sure that some of my subscribers will probably have more knowledge on it, and I'm sure you will leave comments down below as we go further into it. But this article is coming from blackmainstreet.net, and it says, "Never forget the Devil's Punch Bowl. 20,000 freed slaves died after being forced into post-slavery concentration camp." Now, when you hear that word concentration camp, they usually always alluded to the Holocaust, as if they were the only group of people that were put in concentration camps, when, to be truthfully honest, that wasn't even the case. Now, mind you, the Holocaust, that happened in Germany. That didn't happen here. So this Devil's Punch Bowl, which was in a place called Natchez, and I'm hoping I'm not pronouncing this correctly, in Mississippi, this was our ancestors' form of a Holocaust. But I'm going to go ahead and get into the article. "History has always made concentration camps to be synonymous with the atrocities of Nazi Germany, but America has its own dirty secrets about the use of concentration camps. These camps were located in Natchez, Mississippi, and were used to quarrel free slaves during and after the American Civil War." Now, it's funny, because when I was reading those comments under the Palm Wars Rise of the Low IQ video, you had a lot of palm-colored people in those comment sections talking about the Civil War, but they purposely, or maybe because they didn't know themselves, left out this part. Now, this would be connected to the Civil War, because it said that they were funneling in freed slaves before, during, and after the American Civil War. Let me continue. "As slaves were being emancipated from the plantations, their route to freedom usually took them in the vicinity of the Union Army forces. Unhappy with the slaves being freed, the Army began recapturing the slaves and forced the men back into hard labor camps." Basically, because when they lost their property, which was slaves, and they didn't have anyone to work the land anymore because they were too lazy to do it or didn't know how to do it themselves, they said, okay, we're going to go against what was put on the books. So they basically did something that was completely illegal. It was illegal to have slaves at that time, but they didn't care. And they funneled them back into slavery. So it's like they didn't even have enough time to experience true quote unquote freedom before they were funneled right back into slavery. Illegally, again. It wasn't legal anymore. In 1865, it was signed that the slavery, chattel slavery, was abolished. But they went against it anyway and put those men back in there because they needed someone to continue working the land, because the land wasn't done being built. And they have the nerve to tell us that our ancestors, or we didn't contribute anything to the building of this establishment that they benefit off of. I beg to differ. The most notorious of the several concentration camps were established in what was located in Natchez, Mississippi. As the slaves made their way to freedom, the town of Natchez went from a population of 10,000 to 120,000 people almost overnight. In order to deal with the population influx of recently freed slaves, a concentration camp was established to essentially eradicate the slaves. The men were recaptured by the Union troops and forced back into hard labor. The women and children were locked behind the concrete walls of the camp and left to die from starvation. Many also died from the smallpox disease, which I'm almost certain came from the European. In total, over 20,000 freed slaves were killed in 1 year inside of this American concentration camp. Now, mind you, it said it went from a population of 10,000 to 120,000. So minus 20,000, they're now down to 100,000. Probably less than that. A researcher studying the existence of the concentration camp said the Union Army did not allow them to remove the bodies from the camp. They just gave them shovels and said bury them where they dropped. The camp was called the Devil's Punch Bowl because of the way the area is shaped. The camp was located at the bottom of a cavernous pit with trees located on the bluffs above. Today, the bluffs are known for the wild peach grooves, but the locals will not eat any of the fruit because some are aware of what has fertilized the trees. One researcher has noted that skeletal remains still wash up on the area becomes flooded by the Mississippi River. Even when America tries to bury its racist ways, we must force America to acknowledge what has occurred and not shy away from the truth. Let's not forget all the free slaves that died in American concentration camps at the Devil's Punch Bowl. That was rather, it was, even though that was a rather short article, it definitely said a lot. That's why I hope that if there's any more additional information, I'm sure that my subscribers will leave this down or leave some comments down below and let me know what else there is out there, because I'm almost certain there's more out there. But just reading this article, even though it was kind of short, it said a lot. And you can see why America or the school system would never touch this. They would probably touch Black Wall Street before they touch this. Now, based on what I'm looking at, I think this happened before Black Wall Street. But that's really a shame, though, because here you have these individuals who are slaves, who are probably born into slavery, and they finally get to experience some kind of a freedom. And I say some kind of because in my honest opinion, they really weren't that free. And then they found out the hard way that they really weren't. And they got captured and forced to work even harder probably than before illegally. I have to keep reiterating that it was definitely illegal, because before the abolishment of slavery, it was legal to own slaves. But after the abolishment of slavery in 1865, it became illegal to own a person as property. Even though on the books, they also say that black people were 3/5 of a human being. They had to justify by putting that in there. And they did it anyway. And if you asked your modern day palm colored person what Make America Great Again means, and they say they don't know, just keep in mind that this would be a part of it. I mean, this right here also broke up families. Like, you saw what they said. They made the men work. They made the men work and made them work harsh labor. And then the women and the children did not work, but they kept them behind a wall separate from their men. And they died of starvation because they weren't given any food. They weren't given any water. They weren't given any shelter. They just left them there to die. And then they said, what do you want to do with these bodies? Oh, just bury them where they dropped. And then they said, just imagine being in that area where they said, oh, they were buried at, and they said they saw skeletal bones wash up on the shore. That's a deceased melanated person who was affected by this incident. And then they said they also got infected with smallpox. And like I said, we know where that came from. We know where that disease came from. We know exactly where it came from because it took out another group of people, the Native Americans. That same disease, put it in the blankets and gave them to the natives, and they put it on them and they died. They got sick and they died. So when you think about all these diseases that keep popping up all over the place, for me, you can only really go back to one particular source when it comes to a lot of these diseases that are happening, especially back then. And this is before you had modern medicine. It's just something that they had. But it makes you also wonder, how in the world did they get it? What did they do to contract said disease if they couldn't get it from something that was man-made? Because they didn't have all those high-tech labs back then like we have today, where you can create something in a lab and just put it out there if you wanted to, say, extinguish a group of people. They got it from somewhere. I would not be surprised if they got it from some kind of an animal. That's how they said AIDS got started. Was it that they said it was some palm-colored man over on the continent messing with something of the primate family, and that's how it got out. Because after all, think about it, HIV and AIDS, for the most part, as far as we know, the first person to have it was a palm-colored male, and then the rest is history. But I'm glad that I was able to do this little, this video about it. Like I said, it's not a very long video, but I'm glad that I was able to get some more awareness of it. Like I said, I have heard of the Devil's Punch Bowl before, but I didn't know to what extent it went. But yes, this was Black people's Holocaust right here. This was their own Holocaust right here, and it does not ever get talked about. And it never will get talked about. This when they buried those bodies, that was them burying history. Both of our history having to deal with that, and their history of hiding their wicked ways. You saw the response in the comments when I did that article talking about Black Wall Street. And like I said, they constantly mention the Civil War, but they definitely left this part out. And this happened around the time of the Civil War. Actually, it happened during the Civil War. But I'm going to leave it right here. Y'all let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you in the next one.